model that women play is far more equal in our nation, took women out of a combat role in their armed forces. And certainly I think we all have to recognize that the armed forces are the cornerstone of Israel, and that Israel has been a nation under siege and under attack since its creation. The argument that apparently was used to decombatize women there was that the Arabs fought stronger and more fiercely against a coeducational Israeli armed force because they didn't want to be defeated by women, which goes into the Arab role model as the enemies of the State of Israel, as well as the fact that there were higher casualties and men did not respond to the combat roles while under attack as well in a coeducational combat force than in a single-sex combat force. I would like to ask each of the panelists to comment on that and to ask if they consider those specific factors that allowed the State of Israel, which is more equal than the United States, to reach that determination.
Thank you, Mr. Sensenbrenner. I'd be pleased to do that because that is one of the prevailing myths that is always brought up every time we discuss these issues. Israel is the only country in the world to require conscription for both men and women. However, this situation has led to many misconceptions about the role of women in the Israeli Defense Force. Women have been prohibited from assignment to combat positions since the establishment of Israel's army in 1948. Immediately upon establishment of the State of Israel, the debate regarding women in the Army arose. Debate centered around the inclusion of women at all, and if included, what their function should be. A religious bloc in the first Knesset argued against the inclusion of women, while others argued for total integration. As a compromise, a deal was cut. Women were included and subject to conscription, but all jobs involving combat were closed to them. Previous to the State of Israel, women fought for independence just as women did in the American Revolution or as resistance fighters during World War II. However, these women were never a part of the formal army, nor was the decision to exclude women from combat positions in Israel based on their performance during the War for Independence. I think Dr. Siegel.
Your basic answer to the question then, Ms. Beecraft, is simply that due to religious considerations and the politics in the first Knesset, this decision was made in terms of the constitution of the IDF rather than anything else.
I'm saying that there's never been any data to support the conditions that you brought up, that of the Arab wishing to perpetuate the fighting because women were there, that women in Israel did perform very well in their fight for independence, and that a deal was cut, yes.
Because this issue has been raised so often and very often in the popular press, we've done quite a bit of research at Wheel and tried to track down the sources of the information that the Israeli army made this decision, or the political leaders made this decision, that decision, based on specific incidents which are often related. We have yet to be able to find a documented source of how that happened, and we have spoken to Israeli scholars who have studied this issue as well as looked to our own media for this kind of response. I am aware that even last week in front of this committee, some assertions about the decisions made by the Israeli government in this area, was presented to the subcommittee. I really hope, and I would, for our own information as well as anyone else's, that the subcommittee would try and find out where this documentation comes from, what official record there is of women having served officially in combat and there having been a bad experience either with their performance or with the reaction of the other side, because we have been so far unable to do so.
I've had basically the same experience in my research examining what has happened historically in this country as well as the experience of other countries to try to bring some of this evidence to bear. I have looked for any evidence, even documented assertions that people have made, and I have been unable to come up with the source of that. I have spoken with a couple of uniformed psychologists with the Israeli Defense Forces, and they basically have told me that it is a myth, that there are several of these myths that are prevalent. I think that the decision in the Israeli Defense Forces is made basically on the basis of cultural values. And I would like to present some data on American public's values, some very recent public opinion poll results. These are from a survey done in 1982 by the National Opinion Research Center. And the authors basically say that there is enthusiasm for women in the military on the part of a national representative sample of the American public. For example, 84% wish to keep or increase the proportion female in our services. 84% of those favoring national service would conscript both men and women. 81% believe that the increased number of women in the services that we have had over the last 10 years has either raised or had no effect on military effectiveness. In addition, a majority of the sample approved of all of the following. Some of these are jobs, specific jobs for women in our military, and some of them are other sorts of questions. But a majority thought that women could be typists in the Pentagon, nurses in a combat zone, that they approved of the current or greater proportion of women in the armed forces, and a majority, in fact it's 84%, and I'm going down, all of those had greater than 84%. If they approved of national service, they thought women ought to be included. They approved of women as military truck mechanics. They thought that women raised effectiveness or made no difference. They approved of women as jet transport pilots. A majority also approved of women as jet fighter pilots, missile gunners in the United States, as a commander of a large base, crew members on combat ships, and they approved of drafting women. That is, among those who approved of a draft now or an emergency, a majority approved of drafting women.
Was there a question that was asked upon mandatorily assigning women to combat role? Because that's what the ERA would do, according to your testimony. The services would not have any choice if there was a constitutional mandate against discriminatory assignment based upon sex in the military.
Now, as I have said, I am not testifying, I'm not a legal expert, and I will not testify as to whether the ERA would mandate that.
I was just asking if that question was asked in the opinion poll, because all of us at this table do lots of opinion sampling as a part of our political and governmental operation, and I think we all would agree that the answer you get depends upon the question you ask.
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, one indication of that, not only in terms of the way the question is asked, but the situation at the time. In times of national emergency, we are willing to do, or perceived national emergency, we are willing to do a lot more. I also believe that if we ask any question, I don't have results on that because it was not asked, but if we ask, should we draft women and mandatorily put them in combat roles, we have to ask that question, should we do that for men as well? And then you do a comparison of what is the difference, because some of the resistance to putting women in combat roles, be it voluntary or involuntary, is an attitude towards combat in general. I mean, some interesting historical data in terms of both wording and the situation as it affects the will of people. In November of 1940, in a sample, the American public was asked, would you be in favor of starting now to draft American women between the ages of 21 and 35 to train them for jobs in wartime? It did not specify what kinds of jobs. Only a minority of the people, a substantial minority, 38% of the men and 48% of the women, favored that. However, in December of 1941, the same question was asked, and this was, of course, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. 64% of the men thought that women ought to be drafted, and 73% of the women thought that women ought to be drafted.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
I would like to add a small comment that I think would be responsive to what Mr. Sensenbrenner was saying. I think also one of the things that needs to be defined in a question of assignment of women to military, to combat roles mandatorily is what constitutes a combat role. There's a whole lot of misperception of what a combat role is and isn't in the American public's mind, which is one of the things that we're about. So simply asking combat role is also in and of itself could be very misleading.